Great. Welcome to the Vermont House Appropriations Committee. It is Tuesday, February 14th, 2023. I think Valentine's Day. And we had a briefing this morning on security. And right now we're running a little bit late. So I appreciate Commissioner's patience. But we're going to have with us now the Department of Taxes and go over their budget presentation for FY24. Commissioner, I don't think you were with us during budget adjustment. So I'm going to ask us to introduce ourselves because we're all kind of somewhat new. I remember you from my last time around in here.
Yeah, sure.
Texas. And, I'm Representative Diane Lanfer, and I represent Addison 3 and live in Virginia.
Representative Robin Shaw, Middlebury, good to see you.
Pat Brennan from Esther.
Tiff Bloomley from Burlington.
Harry Dolan from Waitsfield, and I represent Duxbury, Facein, Moortown, Waitsfield, and Warren. Good to see you.
Hi, Mark Mahali from Callis, Plainfield, and Marshfield.
Trevor Swirl, Underhill, and Jericho.
Woody Page, report.
Rebecca Holcomb, Sharon Stratford, Norton Thetford.
Good morning, Jim Harrison, Chittenden, Mendon, Killington, and Pittsfield.
He's getting so good, I might remember all your town sometime coming up. Representative Tolino is at a meeting, but he'll be back, Brattleboro. And then Representative Lynn Dickinson is at the end there, and she is from St. Albans. Not there right now, but she'll be coming in. This taxes budget belongs to Representative Shy. So I'm sure you worked with her before on this.
Who we know well, yeah.
Yes.
So Commissioner, for the record, and we'd like to introduce yourself and your team.
Yeah, absolutely, thank you. So Commissioner Craig Bolio, I'm here with our Chief Operating Officer, Andrew Stein, who's here remotely, as well as our Finance Director, Sharon Acey, and then also Will Anderson from the Department of Finance and Management is here with us. And all of those folks are instrumental in putting this budget together, and they have my utmost thanks. What a better way to start a day about celebrating love than the tax department, right? Everybody's favorite agency.
Well, in this committee, we like it.
This is perfect. So I'm going to just start speaking a few minutes about our mission, values, and goals as a department, and then I'm going to hand it over to Andrew to really get into the meat and potatoes of the budget and the ups and downs. Are we driving the slides? Question I should have asked before.
I don't think so.
Oh, you have the slides. Oh, perfect. Okay.
We have them in our, yes.
That's perfect then. So I'm just going to start on the first slide that says the mission and goals. And actually maybe where I should start really on the second page, if you want to flip to the page that has the 4 core values. But our mission is a simple but important one. It's to serve Vermonters by administering our tax laws fairly and efficiently to help taxpayers understand and comply with their state tax obligations. The part that I really like to focus on are those first 3 words, right? To serve Vermonters. And there's a variety of ways that we do that. In 2021, we actually established core values. So it was a relatively recent exercise for us. Although we had a mission statement for a long time, to my knowledge, the department hadn't established core values before. And we thought really at that point in 2021, coming up on 2 years of emergency management from the pandemic, that we ought to have a shared language or a North Star to help guide or ground our decision making moving forward and help shape the agency that we wanted to be. And we established 4 of them. The first is service, maybe the one that was most organically and vigorously practiced during the pandemic, when my office did a lot of stuff that we didn't do, as many agencies and businesses around the state and the country did. But really one that I was proud of our staff. Every day they came in, put their heads down and said, point me in the direction of helping somebody and I'll do it. When we talk about tax administration, right, if people don't understand what their liabilities are, they're less likely to file. And they're less likely to file accurately. Right? For better or worse, the bedrock of the U.S. tax system is voluntary reporting. Right? People report to us what they owe. They report to us what they paid. We examine it. Maybe we adjust it. We send a refund or a bill. Right? But we don't go get every dollar. People come to us with that. Furthermore, and they've had academic studies that back this up. In those cases where people do not understand their liabilities, if you take that service-oriented approach, it has a measurable difference on the voluntary compliance rate and the voluntary reporting rate. One of the most mind-blowing stats from my department is 98% of the money, more than 98% of the money that my department collects comes in voluntarily. That means that we stand up the systems and we produce the forms, we produce the instructions, and we stand by to help when people need it. But 98% comes in voluntarily, right? And that doesn't mean that our compliance division isn't doing their job. They bring in over $50 million a year, and they've brought in more money year over year, every year for approaching the last decade, save for 2020 when COVID hit and we repurposed folks. Our second,
So just a quick question on the $50 million.
Sure.
Can you categorize that as to, I mean, some people make honest mistakes.
Yeah.
And they need to be corrected.
That's right.
Some people are intentionally trying to skirt the system.
That's right.
Shucks, I got caught, so I got to pay. If you had to estimate buckets you could put that in?
I don't want to estimate a number, but I can say the vast majority is honest mistakes.
What?
The vast majority is honest mistakes.
Okay.
Not outright fraud. Now, we have some, right? And we catch it every year. But most people, they just don't know what the right thing is to do. And so it's an honest mistake. There's also an element, and we'll talk a little later in the presentation, which is the tax gap, right? And that is also comprised of more honest mistakes and those folks who are trying to skirt the rules and not complying. And that's a little ambiguous as to how big that is. But yeah, I would say the majority is mistakes.
Thank you.
Did you have a question?
I'm just going to leave it on the table. I mean, I'm going to leave it on the table.
Okay.
The second core value is integrity, right? As we just talked about, the bedrock of the U.S. tax system is voluntary reporting, right? So we need to be signaling both to the people who want to do the right thing, that we do the right thing, but also signal to the people who aren't going to do the right thing, that we do the right thing, right? And there's a few ways that we go about that. The first is that we take to the maximum degree our responsibilities for confidentiality and security. We strive to make sure that at all levels of the agency, we're collecting the proper amount of tax and not just revenue maximization. And we've got to have a culture that holds ourselves accountable, right? That people feel comfortable admitting mistakes and that we can correct them. And that also, if somebody sees something wrong, they can tell us and know that we'll take action on that. The third is growth. And that's not necessarily growth of revenue, but hopefully you do see that over time. But it's really growth about the way that we provide value to Vermonters, right? And certainly with the pandemic, we saw how much in the world and society was changing. There's a lot of elements of that in tax administration too, right? You've got cryptocurrency, you've got the gig economy, you've got remote work, you've got other stuff I'm not even thinking of, right? All this stuff impacts taxes, impacts tax administration, and our department has to remain at the forefront of that to be able to serve Vermonters and make sure that we're doing our duty to the state and to our taxpayers. And that means that our staff have to feel like they're empowered and have a future at the agency, right? Part of that mission. It's why organizational health, employee engagement, and staff morale are such high priorities for me.
Yep, go ahead.
I really appreciate you're working on this. And one of the things, and you see this at the federal level as well, and one of the challenges about talking about non-compliance is that there is there are so many opportunities that are within the law for people to avoid paying taxes. And it feels like our tax agencies are barely able to keep up with that and make recommendations on how to address that. And I wonder if you're seeing that as well.
So
If you're very wealthy, you don't have to pay taxes.
So, I mean, there's a bigger question that you're asking there. I mean, I think what you might be referencing is probably a lot of the internal revenue. And so the challenge that any state agency or state would feel when they decouple from that, and we feel this particularly in Vermont, is the challenge that becomes for compliance if you start to decouple from the feds. So if you're concerned about certain areas of the Internal Revenue Code, maybe having certain taxpayers not paying their fair share, Vermont could decouple from those. And there are areas that we do that. For example, Vermont doesn't recognize accelerated depreciation schedules. We have our own rules for certain net operating losses as well. In a small state like Vermont, that gets challenging quickly, right? Because we rely today so much on the federal infrastructure for audits. We get what's called federal tax information, and that brings in millions of dollars a year, where the IRS has done audits. And if we've got the same rules as them, we can piggyback that. If we don't have the same rules as them, it's kind of all on us to find it. So it's a decision for the legislature in areas to decouple from federal tax law. But I do urge caution and thoughtfulness when we do that, to make sure that we'll have the resources at the state level to go after that.
Right.
Does that get to the?
Yeah, and it probably also affects carried assets. It affects business pass-throughs. And I just wonder if you feel like you have the capacity to track that stuff.
We do not have we have the capacity to do what we're doing tied up to the federal law. If the discussion started to be, let's start decoupling from a lot of the federal laws, then we would have capacity issues for sure. Sure.
You don't have to answer this now. Cybersecurity, and I know you've got a great new system.
Yeah,
that came in on time, on budget, and paying for it's great result right there. But I know that the cybersecurity's been a real issue, and your department would be one that would be a prime place to tap into. And then a few years ago, which I'm sure hasn't gone away, but the rash of false tax claims that came in that ended up being problematic, somebody filing on somebody's behalf, and then when they go to file later, somebody has absconded with their refund.
Yes.
It's,
I'll hit both of those separately.
Yeah.
So to start with cybersecurity, I mean, I think for any revenue agency, that's like top of mind concern, priority, right? We work with our partners in the Agency of Digital Services who handle a lot of those kind of cybersecurity issues. They aren't handled directly from my department, but as you mentioned, we do have an awesome computer system, VTAX, that we continue to invest in to make sure that we have all the latest security updates. And it's when Andrew starts to talk about what's in our ups and downs, you'll get some information. Part of what we're asking for this year is to continue to make those investments. So I think we're in good shape, but nobody's ever perfect, right? And we've always got to be vigilant about that. The second issue of identity theft, refund fraud. So yeah, that was, I would say, probably peaked approaching about a decade ago, right? And there was an interesting point where criminals were able to start getting that information where state agencies were catching up to getting that information, right? And so that created this real information mismatch where a criminal would have the info and it would look legitimate enough that the IRS and state are greater even more data than they would have ever had before. And unfortunately, there are other financial crimes that I think have become more attractive in those years. Thankfully for us as tax administrators, that means a downward trend. The second piece is we've been really vigilant about this in Vermont for the whole time. Where the IRS and other states have struggled with it, we have worked really, really hard in Vermont to have like virtually $0 of fraud issued. And so I can't say this for sure, but I'm hopeful that folks who are inclined to commit these crimes look at Vermont and say, that's not a place that is worth doing it. And that is hopefully paying dividends for us as well. But thankful to say it's always going to be a problem, I think, but definitely on the downward trend and limited exposure these days.
thank you. Representative Bloomley?
Hi. So a few years ago, the Department of Labor sent out
1099s.
the 1099s, and a number of my constituents were affected by that. And the now identity theft insurance that the state provided for the last 2 years is expiring. And I'm just wondering, how vulnerable are those folks to identity theft at this stage in the game?
I don't know that I can answer that. I mean, there were so many people involved, and the actions that those individuals may have taken might protect them as well if you freeze your credit and things like that. I will say, I mean, there are data breaches all the time. right? And we are constantly trying to watch out for those, keep ourselves abreast of when they're happening so that we can flag our own systems, right? And one of the more insidious scams these days is trying to hack CPA firms, right? So that they can get all the client information. And when those kind of things happen, we try to figure out, who was involved, who was impacted. We will have data on that from the Department of Labor issue, right? Because we know who issued all those 1099s. I would also say, normally when we see these kind of crimes, it's not homegrown, it's not local. It's, identity theft fraud is not usually being committed by Vermonters on Vermonters. It's usually, in fact, people out of the country because it's harder to catch them, right? So in terms of whether or not somebody got something in a Vermont mailbox, there's certainly a risk, but I would say it's lower than if, for instance, like a data breach happened where somebody outside of the country had access to database. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Again, I think for a variety of reasons, people should always be vigilant and taking steps to protect their own identity. But at our department, that's one of the things that we try to be mindful of is being aware of those kind of things and how can we make sure on our side that we're trying to catch that if people are filing when they shouldn't be.
Okay. Thanks.
And then the last core value I have is community. And that's, in many ways, that's the value that all the other values flow into, right? I mean, I think maybe us and the DMV have the broadest constituency in Vermont state government and that we interact with virtually all Vermonters, right? And they come from different walks of life, different backgrounds, different cultures, different languages. We've got to be ready to serve them all. And recognizing how community plays a role in tax administration, right? When we have people who are calling us for their renter credit and really need that money, right? Those are friends, family, and neighbors. When a business that we frequent is collecting sales tax on behalf of the state, right? To just be mindful about the external community that we have, but also the internal community that we have at tax, right? And caring about organizational health and employee engagement and morale. We're going to feel better and we're going to do our jobs better, right? If we're supporting each other at the department, working together and being willing to ask for and receive help. And that really feeds into our three goals.
Actually, just one thing. I do remember when you talked about these values last year in House appropriation, we were hearing from every department and agency, and I think we still are this year, about how high the vacancy rates are. And I seem to recall that your vacancy rate was really quite low in comparison with other agencies. Is that still the case this year?
Yeah, I think it's about 5%. And I can say we are fully staffed as of this month in every division except one. So, and that includes our taxpayer services division and our finance division, both of which are integral with the tax processing season. So we're feeling pretty good right now. I mean, we've put a lot of focus on this. There was a period where certainly when the pandemic first started, we started seeing a lot of applicants, people looking for that stability and of state government. And then we got to the point where I think everybody got where those were starting to dwindle and we were starting to struggle a little bit. And we put a lot of focus on it, right? About selling ourselves as a department, about selling the work that we do of being meaningful and valuable. We have an awesome recruitment video on our website for people who haven't seen it. It's really well done, talking to like frontline staff about what they like working for the department. And all of that has paid dividends. Really a lot of like frontline staff putting in time to be messengers to potential applicants. So happy to say we are feeling pretty good going into this.
Kudos to you guys because you really took the initiative and created a community that's not just the people at the top putting in.
Cheers.
Paper, so.
Yeah. And we have really three overarching goals, and then I'll wrap and hand it over to Andrew. But the first is to be a model for service-oriented tax administration, right? And what that means is I want to be recognized for the service levels that we're providing. Every agency says they're service-oriented, right? But it's not the same. I once called the regular helpline of a bunch of tax departments around the country. About a quarter of them hung up on me. This was like the phone number to get help. And they were like, we're sorry, we have too many calls, please call back. That doesn't happen, right? If you called my department right now, I think that the wait time would be maybe 0, certainly under 5 minutes.
Been unable to get through to a person. I'm just to say it.
And we should talk because that's not what we're going for. And it's not the experience I hear about. So let's talk and we can fix that. The second is to reduce the tax gap, right? We talked about that a little earlier in the presentation. So the tax gap is the difference between what should have been reported and paid and what actually was. It's really hard to estimate. And so to my knowledge, the state has never done it, but the IRS does it every few years. And it's always really backdated. So their latest, I think, is for 2016 and 2017. The IRS estimates that after all of their own compliance efforts, the federal tax gap is about 13 or 14 cents on the dollar. So every dollar of federal taxes that should be paid, the IRS thinks they're getting between 86 and 87 cents. Right, which translates to $500 billion or close to it, I think. So it's a big number, right? And there are reasons they have federal payroll taxes that we don't have. We have sales taxes that they don't have. So it's unclear to me if that's what the state tax gap would be. But if you just translated that to the state general fund, you're talking several $100 million, right? So that's foundationally the reason for really any tax department to exist, is to engage with those folks. Again, most of them just making honest mistakes and helping them get into the voluntary compliance system, but also empowering our audit and compliance division to find and engage with those who will not comply voluntarily and helping them get onto the right side of the law. And the third is maybe the most subjective, maybe the hardest, but I want the tax department to be the best place to work in Vermont state government. Taxes are hard. Taxes are complicated. Taxes can be scary for folks. We need a talented and engaged workforce to be able to meet our mission and serve those Vermonters. I want people to enjoy the work that they're doing, to enjoy coming into work. They'll do a better job and we'll all feel better and be happier about it. I have 150 staff. If you asked all of them what it meant to be the best place to work, you might get 150 answers, and that's okay, right? We have to be able to strive for that, even if it's subjective and even if it means different things to different people.
Carrie or Representative Dolan's?
Thank you and good morning. I just want to express my great appreciation for the services that you've been providing Vermonters. I know firsthand, I have constituents who reached out to you with complicated questions that their own accountants couldn't figure out. And you personally responded to them in a very quick turnaround. And that kind of service is, I think, emblematic of your department and the type of work that you're doing for Vermonters every day. So I wanted to just express my appreciation.
Thank you very much for that feedback. And I'm happy to pass it along to our staff when we get those kind of compliments. I mean, I think this is one of the benefits and ways of being a small state and a small department, right? Is, I came up through the department. I started as a temporary employee, right? And I've had really the luxury of working in a number of different positions. So I know different areas of the department. I know what those jobs are like. And many of those folks I knew as peers before I took this job, right? And so I know everybody's working really, really hard. We want to be accessible. We want to be helpful. So I appreciate that feedback and happy to pass it along.
You also have very complicated terrain to explain. So
I'm sorry, say that again?
It's also what you have to explain is very complicated. So I really appreciate
it. Can be. Yeah, it can be.
It's not an easy job.
So I'll make sure you've got 20 minutes to get into your budget and any new initiatives.
Yeah, I'm going to hand it over to Andrew to work through the ups and downs and the initiatives.
Thanks, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. We've had a couple of blips on our end. So if we encounter those, Craig, I'll kick it to you and then I can jump back on. So Andrew Stein, Chief Operating Officer, Department of Taxes. I know many of you, but not all of you. Wish I could be there in person, but getting over an illness. So I'll spare you all the germs on this wonderful Valentine's Day.
Thank you.
So I'm going to start on page 6, which shows our total expenses for the year in a pie chart. $30.8 million. The biggest.
It is something that we noticed, or sorry to interrupt, there's no page numbers.
Whoops.
So, yeah.
Happened to a lot of the presentations
funny.
this year.
Yeah.
All
right.
To be in green at the bottom, they're on my version that I sent along in the PDF.
You know what they are? They're right here in the middle, they're just in black.
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
But for some reason, it looks like there is a formatting issue on the one page that I want to start on, which is page 6. So it's just after the core values with the pie chart there.
Yeah, and we're trained in to go right straight for the crosswalk. So it's the one slide just above the crosswalk.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this year, biggest piece of the pie, as is typical for us, are salaries and benefits. The piece that we'll spend a bit of time talking about here is our IT piece, which has grown from past years in terms of our operating budget request. It's not actually growing in terms of our expenditures, but we're folding in our computer modernization fund into the annual budgeting process, or proposing to do that, which we'll spend a bit of time on in a moment. I want to just touch on our current initiatives, what our current budget is supporting. We're implementing a range of new policies, the Act 138 tax reforms. That's a big package that passed last year. New child tax credit, changes to the earned income tax credit, changes to the child and dependent care tax credit, changes to retirement income exclusions, student loan interest deduction. There's some other reforms that occurred there too. And that took a lot of time in testing from our team to update our system and then to help taxpayers navigate those reforms. So that's a really, really big deal. I mean, our personal income tax accounts for 60% of the general fund, and it has by far the largest impact on Vermonters in terms of the number of filers that we have, 380,000 filers. It's really a massive effort every year to administer this tax, though we're glad to do it. So corporate income tax reforms, we're also in the process of implementing a range of corporate income tax reforms that the legislature passed last year. Cannabis taxes, we implemented this past year, and that's an ongoing implementation, helping new businesses. There's a lot of folks who have never run a business who are navigating a new market here, and there's a lot of service that goes into that. And then there's a range of new local option tax towns and helping businesses understand how to navigate the local option tax. We want to maintain a historically high processing efficiency this tax season, which we'll talk about in a little bit if we get to that slide. But you can look under our performance measures for personal income tax administration. Last year, we set the loftiest refund processing goal that we've ever set as a department, and we hit it. We also finished processing homestead declarations for property tax credits a week in advance of the deadline last year, which is by far the fastest that we've ever turned that around. And there was a lot that went into that. We made a lot of changes to be able to accomplish that. And we're very proud as an organization to have those impacts on our communities. We want to complete the Vermont Property Information Exchange, and more than one, we need to. This is the implementation of the new statewide property tax IT system. It's on budget and on schedule right now. We are in the final phases of implementing that project. We're planning to move forward with a new scanning project. Another item here is building on our recruitment success. And I should also mention, we want to build on our retention success as well. It's important to invest internally as well as externally on building our workforce. And we have a really, really strong team that we're very proud of. We're going to continue process improvements on forms and VTAX updates that we've been working on. And we're planning to further operationalize our organizational values. We're incorporating those in our merit policies and in other areas of our performance evaluation process. So I'm jumping to the next slide here, the ups and downs, which is the meat of this. You know, salaries, benefits, and retirement, those are up. Internal service fees are up. The biggest up here is $5.2 million for the Tax Computer System Modernization Fund. And we'll jump into that a little more on the next slide. But this is a fund that has existed since 2007. And expenditures have been greater than this in the past for this fund. But this fund has never existed within the annual budget cycle. And that's something that we're proposing to change here. This is a fund that used to receive multi-year appropriations. So that's why you're seeing this as an up here, because it typically doesn't come before this committee in this format. Also on here is an $800,000 up for it says the State Appraisal and Litigation Assistance Program. We're calling it internally the Commercial Appraisal and Litigation Assistance Program. And I'll touch on that on the next slide.
So Andrew, let me start. The special fund, you have the 5.2 and the 800,000 is coming from the special fund. What's the name of that special fund?
So those are two different funds.
Two different, okay.
Those are two different funds. So the 5.2 million is the Tax Computer System Modernization Fund. And that's a fund that has existed since 2007.
Yep. That's the savings went to pay and then you kept a percentage into so that you could, okay.
Yes. So that's part of, maybe we should just go to the next slide because that gets of our.
But the 800,000 is,
Commercial
What fund?
appraisal and litigation assistance program. So what that would come out of is local option tax processing fees. There's a special fund for local option tax processing fees. And as the number of local option tax towns has increased over the past number of years, so have those fees. And while our administrative burden is higher than it was even 3-4 years ago for administering these taxes, it's not as high as the revenues generated from these fees. And this is something we've been transparent about over the years. And so this is a proposal to use those surplus and fees to cover a need that municipalities have been expressing to the department and to the state for a long time now.
okay, Representative Harrison has a question?
Yeah, I just want to go back to the 5.2 million. Is that that increase an ongoing expense each year, or is this a one-time?
It's ongoing. It's ongoing. So it's about 5 million a year, depending on the year. So that fund has and continues to pay for our VTax system, our integrated IT system. We never received a separate. We have a little bit of general fund that we use to pay for that, but to build this system, we have used the computer modernization fund, and we use the computer modernization fund to support that system. So in terms of implementing new tax types, in terms of security enhancements, that is paid for from this fund. The Vermont Property Information Exchange, the new property tax system for the state, is paid for from this fund. The micro simulation model that the Joint Fiscal Office and the administration share to model economic and personal income tax changes is paid for from this fund. The scanning project that is underway and that we're planning to move forward this next year is also paid for by this fund. And so
one important piece there, Rep. Harrison, that might be helpful. So this money, it looks like new spend, but it isn't. This has been getting spent. It's just been getting spent through session law and multi-year appropriations. So what we're looking for is
That's very helpful, because I'm
putting it into
whatever you've been spending and then a $5 million increase.
Right. So it's not a $5 million increase. It's what we've been spending. There is a restructuring of the fund that is a bit of a general fund hit because the fund has been deficit spending for a number of years by design. But yeah, so that's why it looks scarier than it actually is. But the challenge, and one of the reasons we're proposing this, is increased transparency, right? If you were to try to go back and piece this fund together, you're looking through session law year after year with amendments and restructurings and things like that. So our proposal here in part is to say, let's just make this part of the annual budgeting cycle where it will show up on these.
Thank you for the clarification.
Sure.
So
yeah, thank you, Greg.
when when VTax was started, it was like, if we, correct me if I've got, I'm going to just be very simple. We want to purchase X system. X system should create savings within the process.
Yep.
Okay, so literally move to the new system in segments, but the savings that were created from the system purchase and running were then fed back in to pay for it.
So
and then in the end, we had there was excess, and the VTax used to give the general fund because that savings was a nice boost.
That's right. So
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Madam Chair. The one thing I would clarify there, it was not like internal savings, it was increased revenues that got
increased. Okay, yeah.
So essentially we had, again, more data, better processes than we've ever had. So our audit and compliance division was able to bring in more money. I would say it was so successful, we actually got the amount of money we needed early and paid it early and got a discount. And you may remember that over the last several years, we've had a couple of restructurings that have been designed to bring the revenues going into the fund down, because we did hit a point where the big part of VTax was paid, the $28 million upfront investment, but the fund structure was still generating the money to pay for that. And we were like, whoa, bump the brakes, right? We don't need that much. A few years ago, it got restructured again to be 2% of compliance revenue, which, remember from earlier in the presentation, is 2%. So it was 2% of 2%. And that was intended to spend down the surplus that had been created by the fact that we had that disconnect. I don't want to call it a disconnect.
Clients,
Yeah, exactly. Before we had restructured it, the fund was running such a surplus. And so now we think that this restructuring, which does increase the revenues going to the fund a bit, will be sustainable for the long term.
So how much is in the fund now? Is there zero or is there, that 2% of 2%?
Andrew, you've got that, yeah?
So
Yeah, give me a sec. It's what we're projecting is around the end of this year, around 4 to 5 million in the fund. But
Keeping in mind that we spend about 5 million.
If you give me a second, the issue is we project that. So high level, the issue is in FY24, if we don't adjust the funding structure, we'll have spent down the money in the fund because we've been spending down this big surplus since I think it was FY19 or FY20 that it went into effect.
Yeah.
You can see if I show you a chart and we walk JFO through this, the revenues were like this and the expenditures were like this, which built up a surplus in the fund.
Right.
And once that changed, we then had the expenditures up here and the revenues here, and we've been spending it down.
Right.
So at the end of FY24, we will just about spend out or have spent out before the end of FY24 all the money in that fund. So it's about 5 million at what we're projecting at the end of this year, heading into FY24.
So the ongoing 5 million or so will come from this fund to take care of the ongoing. Right.
But it's going to be calculated differently than they have been doing it.
Yeah, that's right. So that you've got that amount within that.
Yes.
Okay.
The other key element to this is the fund is set to sunset at the end of this fiscal year. So that's another part of our proposal is to
the language.
modify it. Yeah, it's all there in the language. But yeah, there's also a restructuring that moves it away from compliance revenue specifically. So instead of 2% of compliance revenue, we're asking for 0.21% of all revenue collected. There's a few reasons for that. One is, as I talked about, we strongly encourage voluntary compliance, even within the compliance division. And so I didn't want to have odd incentives for maybe the department to be taking overly aggressive actions for our budget. And so and it also, as we get further away from VTAX implementation, right? VTAX changed everything at the department, not just the compliance division. So it is a restructuring in that way as well.
So,
Go ahead.
and we had talked about this before, but we will need language for your initiatives to put in the budget. So
I think it's in there.
is it in the
governor's? It's in the governor's budget.
It is, the language that we want is in there, and you're okay with the language the way it is, so we'll just check with Maria to make sure it's the way we like it too. Okay.
Sure.
So that goes to, so you're codifying what was in session law to make it statute.
Yep.
And paying for it with paid taxes.
Yep.
And then some other piece of what you were doing within that?
Well, it's the bringing it into the annual budgeting cycle. Instead of multi-year appropriations, do it 1 year at a time.
Yeah, okay.
It also makes more sense as we're in the operational phases of these projects, right? It was useful to have multi-year appropriations when we're in implementation and who knows when we've got to pay the invoice, but now it's much more cyclical.
Great. Thank you.
Sure.
And the third, so we've talked about the Computer Modernization Fund. We've talked about Commercial Appraisal and Litigation Assistance Program, which I'll just touch on that a little bit more. That was passed last year, 32 VSA Section 5413. It was supported by both the administration and the legislature. And what this really, the aim here is to improve the integrity of the appraisal system with regard to commercial properties. So when we're talking about our education funding system, and particularly on the property tax side, it's a closed loop system. So that means if municipalities don't have the money to value certain properties, and they're typically the most complex and highest value properties in the state to value, that then shifts, it creates a risk of shifting tax burden onto other taxpayers. And so what this will do is it'll create two positions, a program manager as well as an attorney position, which is technically through the AGO's office, but we pay for it. And that position will help with appeals and litigation. And $500,000 in money to pay for commercial appraisers to assist municipalities with these large complex commercial appraisals. So that's that proposal, and that proposal would be an ongoing spend. Any questions on that before I get to the last main
So
initiative?
this isn't one time, would be $500,000 a year?
800,000 a year on.
800,000 a year.
And this was interesting. This program was created with a contingent effective date, contingent on July 1 of this coming year, if the legislature funds it. So the legislature had asked us to come back with a cost estimate, which we've submitted to Ways and Means and Senate Finance, but this is that cost estimate to run the program. And this would, to be clear, this is dipping our toe in the water, right? We think that the scope of this would be 10 to 15 properties a year. So this is not the state able to assist on all commercial appraisal for 800,000 a year, but this is to stand up the program, see what it's like, see what the benefits are and the challenges, and help out municipalities that need it.
So this could be like when Green Mountain College closed or something, and it's how do you appraise it for, if it's not a college anymore? Or
yeah, I mean,
other-
right. Examples like that are what we're thinking about. And, towns that may not have the resources, but get, some kind of big new thing or a mall or a dam. Well, we have a program for the dams, but the one that I keep thinking about is a methane digester, right, in Salisbury, right, where, who knows how to handle that. So it would allow the state to be able to help with that.
Right.
And then the last initiative is a one-time initiative, and that is to use current use surplus to make a one-time appropriation to modernize the current use program. And I have a description on this slide for you all, but roughly 43% of Vermont's land area is enrolled in the current use program. However, this program is highly reliant on paper. All of the records for this program are in paper. They're in a vault, but they're in paper. And to digitize all of the records and further digitize and streamline a range of processes, specifically the application side, and then moving forward, transfers, withdrawals of properties in that system, we're proposing a one-time investment in that program of 1.75 million. And at its heart, we're going to incorporate this program in our VTAX system. It wasn't initially incorporated in that system because it's part of the property tax system, and the state of Vermont does not we don't collect property taxes, and we don't administer property taxes through the VTAX system. But over time, we've identified opportunities to incorporate this specific program into the VTAX system, and there's a range of checks and verifications that can be automated. And we have a talented team in this space, but they really struggle to keep up with the demands of the program. When you have this amount of paper and the extent of manual processes involved here, it's almost impossible to keep up with. So this is not our best performing program. And if you go to slide 12 of our presentation, you'll see that. I mean, the number of applications processed by April 15th is 20%. The average days to process applications, and this doesn't fall solely on our team, but the number of days to process an application is about 150 days. And that is really out of line with a number of our other programs. And we want to see major improvements here. So I'll end. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, so committee, I just wanted to look because I wasn't sure that I had seen the 1.75, but for those that are keeping score, it's on page 9 in the language. It's under the fiscal 24 one-time special fund appropriations. So this 1.75 is coming from the current use administration fund, which from notes when we had a walkthrough, I have that it has about $2 million balance in it. And so there's a request here that's where it's coming from. So it's not a one-time general fund. It's a one-time from this special fund to make this upgrade, right?
And that special fund is for current use administration, right? I mean, certainly the legislature could change that, but that's what it made sense to us.
I wanted to make sure that I saw where it was and what, yeah, okay. Yep. So it's in there. Representative Holcomb.
When you do these modernizations of the systems, do you also look at how we information? I think that
Oh, yeah,
to streamline the whole process.
I mean, I had some experience on the VTEX project. I was a business analyst there and then the project director for a couple of years. In many cases, we're rebuilding processes almost from the ground up, right? It's like a fresh look, capacity planning, make sure it works for what we're going to be able to do. The benefit that we'll have doing this one that we didn't necessarily have with VTEX is we have all the experience with VTEX, right? When we first built VTEX, we got a bunch of improvements, but then later we also realized, oh my God, I didn't even realize I could do this, right? Built it out. Now we have more of that, but yes, that's business and process improvement, huge part of the process.
It's a lost opportunity if we don't do that, frankly.
Yeah, for sure.
So I'm just going to wrap up. The last slide I want to spotlight is number 9, personal income tax administration. And again, this is our largest impacts tax. We administer 30 plus tax types, but there's no tax type that impacts Vermonters more than the personal income tax, and that impacts the general fund more than the personal income tax. And our erroneous refunds prevented in calendar year 22 last year were up. Our timely filed refunds issued within 45 days of due date was up to 95%, which is the loftiest goal we've ever set. And that has real impacts on a range of working Vermonters and our communities. So we're very proud of that. And then refunds issued within 30 days of filing, that percentage was way up as well. So it was without a doubt the most successful tax season we've ever had. We also stood up a new renter credit, and as I mentioned before, processed homestead declarations in record time.
Okay. Somebody must have just hit the bells by mistake or something.
No roll call. Okay. So I have one more.
Okay, go ahead and then we'll start wrapping up.
Okay.
Yeah.
We talked earlier with the budget adjustment. I called you and said, gee, we're reverting a lot, millions of dollars for the renter rebate and the homeowner rebate. And we agreed that it was probably because of federal subsidies and other things that took the place of it.
Yep.
And so what's happening this year for this budget? Are you trying to assume something back to normal, or did you change your numbers as a result of what happened?
So the homeowner rebate is forecasted each year. And so that, I don't remember what that's tweaked to this year, but yeah, we always calibrate that. The renter credit is not necessarily calibrated every year, but we did not propose any adjustments to that. That's been at 9.5 million for a number of years. When we first did the reform in 2020, I think, one of the hopes was that we would spend that 9.5 million, right? Because the program spend had been going down year after year. And now we've had the couple weird years with the federal subsidies impacting it. So our stance was, let's not touch it right now. Let's see what happens and then adjust the dials to the program to get that 9.5 spend, if the legislature agrees that that's the right number, of course. But from our chair, it was more of, let's see what it looks like this year and then dial the.
Okay, so wait one more year when all the dust is cleared.
Yeah, and I mean, not all the dust is cleared, right? But hopefully we're getting a clearer picture.
Okay.
And the homeowner rebate is a consensus forecast between JFO and the tax department.
Oh, it is. Okay, thank you.
Yep, sorry, good clarity.
Are you also, what's the, is there a timeline on the homeowner rebate and the property tax credits? I'm asking because some of our towns are now talking about delaying collection of taxes in August until those are fully done, but it's also now creating problems for the school districts that have to receive those revenues in advance of the school year so they can fund. So it feels like something has happened, which is changing local perception of when those rebates will be calculated and people will be informed.
A few years ago, we missed the deadline several years ago. And so that might be reverberations there. But for the last couple of years, we've hit that deadline. Again, last year we hit it a week early, which is usually we're down to it's June 30th. But what I would say is that is a big squeeze for everybody, right? June 30th is the deadline for those files. We get them to towns. A lot of towns want to bill on, July 5th, right? And so they need their tax rates and they need their property tax credit files. So it can also be a real squeeze if the town hasn't voted its budget yet, right? Because the state gets, I believe, 30 days from that. So sometimes there are towns that have delayed that as well, and then we're trying to get everything done at the 11th hour. So it can be a challenge for the towns that want to bill first thing in July. But I will say for the last couple of years, I believe we've had our house in order at the department too. So I'm curious. I'd be curious to talk with some of those communities about where that perception is coming from. But I do acknowledge, since I think it was 3 or 4 years ago at this point, we had missed it for not everybody, but a portion of them, and we sent a second file.
But I remember.
Okay, yeah, so it must have been 2019 or earlier.
The memory may endure both beyond.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm not saying it's you, I'm just trying to figure out where in there.
Yeah, understood.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, and I mean, again, even in the best of times, it's a tight window.
Stuff happens.
Great. Thank you. Anything else you guys want to tell us in committee? Any other questions for
No,
tax department?
thank you.
Oh, this is great. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for all you do, and I'll be in touch.
Appreciate the time.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, as I'm air traffic control.
Excellent, thank you very much. I'll follow up. Yeah.
I'll email you. I want to get that sorted out.
We're good, yeah.
Sarah's good, and then he's got to go, but Sarah's ready. Maybe we can do it before that. Yeah, because we got a break at 11, right?
Okay.
Are we comfortable? You need to go?
I'm gonna walk down.